if you know it. If you don't, you'll hopefully find it interesting. If you do, you'll hopefully find it interesting. I got nothing else to say. If you already know it, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it, sing a couple songs, and we'll light the candles and share a couple of lessons that I take away from Hanukkah every year. First thing to say is Hanukkah doesn't happen. It's not like it's scheduled to happen in December. And it's not an equivalent to Christmas, really. It's not a response to Christmas at all. It just happens to come in the Jewish year. There's actually a Jewish calendar, believe it or not. I don't know if you know that. It's lunar rather than solar. So the months are different, the dates are different. So Hanukkah happens on the same Jewish calendar date every year, but it's not the same American calendar date. Right? Which is why Hanukkah is always a few days around here and there in December somewhere. Sometimes it's the first week, sometimes second, sometimes third. But it is always 8 nights of lighting these candles. These happen to be colorful. They don't have to be anything in particular, except they do have to last a certain amount of time. I believe it's something like 45 minutes. They have to burn at least 45 minutes. So most Hanukkah candles tend to be around the same size. And that is because of the purpose of the candles. The candles I've always loved lighting Hanukkah candles. It was dark in the house, and you always light the candles against a window or outdoors. Lighting them against a window or outdoors is intended to publicize your celebration of the holiday. And that's intentional. It's intended to not be a secret and not be hidden. It's intended to be a public celebration, which is why you'll see menorahs in windows whenever possible. And it is a celebration of a sort of an odd little, I don't know what you call a miracle. One of my favorite writers, Christopher Hitchens, describes a miracle as sort of the suspension of the natural laws, for a moment or whatever it is, like the parting of the Red Sea or the burning of the bush, or these things, miracles, or the turning water into wine, suspension of our known laws of physics and of the natural world. And there is a very tiny one related to Hanukkah, which is why we celebrate the thing for 8 nights and why we light candles in the first place. About 2,200 years ago, Israel, the land of Israel, since biblical times, since about 3,000 years ago, was perceived to be, by Jewish people, perceived to be their homeland, and they built a temple there, the holiest spot in the Jewish world. And in fact, it's thousands of years old, and it's actually a little bit of it is still there. Some of you may know. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is a piece of the old temple. Very old. Most of the temple has been destroyed over the years, as you can imagine, and we don't need to imagine because we know that it goes on really to this day. The land of Israel is conquered and reconquered and taken and retaken and occupied and unoccupied, and it just goes on and on and on for thousands of years. That's not the subject of this conversation whatsoever. But it is true that 2,200 years ago, the temple that Jews had built to celebrate and practice their religion had been taken by, at that time, it happened to be Syrians. It's been a lot of different civilizations in and out of there. But Syrians had taken Israel and had taken the temple and had, in the Jewish mind, desecrated it. That is to say, turned it into a pagan temple, put idols into it, and in fact, the king at the time, who had taken over Israel, we'll call it Israel, at the time, had mandated that all Jews were to convert. I'm not even sure what that religion they were supposed to convert to. Probably paganism, actually, as I think about it. But they were ordered to convert from Judaism or be killed. The story of Judaism is a lot of these sorts of, story of a lot of people, is a story of oppression and repression and persecution. It just is for a lot of people, and Jews have had their share of it, maybe more than their share, but their share for sure. And in that particular time, they were ordered to convert or die, and were kicked out of their temple, and the temple was kind of laid waste. Okay, it wasn't destroyed, but it was abused for decades, as I understand it. And there was a small group of kind of Jewish militia They called themselves the Maccabees, which is based on a Hebrew word for hammer. And the Maccabees decided they would retake the temple and kick the Syrian, this occupying force out of Israel, and certainly out of their temple, out of Jerusalem. And they succeeded, and it was, we were taught as kids that it was kind of a guerrilla war, you know, that they were far outnumbered by the Syrian occupiers, but waged this guerrilla war and succeeded in kicking the Syrian occupation out of the temple and out of Jerusalem. They retook the temple, and that was, of course, a festive day. And on that day, they discovered how desecrated the temple had been, and they grieved, and they attempted to clean it up and to get the idols out of it, and who knows what else was in there. And they also found the menorah that had been used in the temple ritually, biblically kind of designed and commanded at the time, and it was still there, and it hadn't been lit since Jews had lost possession of their temple. And they set about to light their candelabra again, the menorah again. The menorah was olive oil. It was bottles of olive oil that they lit with a little wick stuck into the oil, and they found one bottle of oil in the temple that had not been smashed. So they put the oil into the menorah and they lit it, and they sent somebody, you know, we don't know, how could we possibly know? I think we were told as kids, you know, horseback, who the hell knows, you know. So people went, so somebody was sent to the nearest place where they could get olive oil to return and return the menorah to its former glory and celebrate this ritual the way it had been celebrated probably for centuries until they had lost the temple for these years, right? They lit the bottle of olive oil, sent somebody off to get more olive oil, and the trip there and back was 8 days. Okay, so it was far, although really far if you think about it. I drove today from Orange County. I drove today from Tustin to here. That's probably an 8-day trip if I'm on horseback, you know. So who knows? Nobody knows. But it took 8 days to get there and back with olive oil. And the miracle was that the candles stayed lit for those 8 days, even though it was 1 day's worth of olive oil. So, fast forward 2,200 years, and my family, every year, the Nahmod family, and welcome to the Nahmod family for this morning, every year we set up a menorah, put it in the window to broadcast this miracle. And we light 1 candle on the first day, 8 candles on the 8th day. And we sing a couple of blessings that are sung everywhere the same way, as far as I can tell, for 2,200 years. The same blessings. A couple of the same songs sung for 2,200 years. And if you think about it, I mean, like, I went to, my parents were generous enough to send me to college in England for 1 semester. I was a junior in college, okay? I stayed at the University of Sussex. I went to England and in Brighton, near Brighton, and I stayed in a crappy, like a regular dorm building, okay? It was like built in the 70s. There was nothing fancy about it. A friend of mine went to University of Edinburgh for the same semester. And I took a train to Edinburgh and slept overnight at the place he was sleeping in, the house that he had rented. I was sleeping in some just crappy dorm building. He was housed in a solid stone home that was 1,500 years old. Oh, wow. Right? And that was normal. Like the whole street was 1,500-year-old homes. So when we think, I was just talking to Jude, when we think of what old is in America, versus, you ever watch Antiques Roadshow? It's one of my favorite shows. You watch Antiques Roadshow. The American version is, my family inherited this. It's been in the family for generations. Oh, what's that mean? You know, my grandfather bought it at a store in 1910. That's generations in America. In England, somebody says, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather inherited this from the King of England's, sister's daughter's dog in 1220. You know what I mean? So old is all relative. Jewish traditions are spectacularly preserved. It's one of the things that is amazing, truly amazing about Judaism. One of the most emotional, and I am not religious, 0%. None of this I'm talking to you about has anything to do, in my mind, with religion, and really has anything to do with current events. I'm actually just talking to you as a boy raised in this tradition, in this ancient tradition. So unreligious. I am the heretic in the family, and I have talked about that before in this room, and unfortunately it's streamed and recorded on the record. So for me, it's not religious at all, but ask me how it feels to see a menorah with candles on it, because not only that the Nahmod family did it every year, and that we are now dispersed. My parents are still alive, but they're in Chicago. My brother in New York. My other brother, a 1 to 5 hour drive away in LA, So how does it feel when I light these candles with my little boy who's 12? Who we named, by the way, without even thinking about it. We thought about it. We just love the name, Jude, which actually means Jewish. Judah actually means Jew. Wasn't the plan. My wife is Catholic. We don't practice religion. I mean 0%. Okay, so hear me. This is not a religious practice for me. But family and culture and history, oh, you bet. Right? One of the most emotional moments I ever had related to Judaism, and there have been many, bar mitzvah, there are a lot of special moments. But one of them was, I was on that 6 months in England studying, and there were 5 weeks in between the 2 semesters. I know it's a lot of hard work to go to college in England. So I had 5 weeks off, and I put on my uncle and aunt loaned me their big backpack, and I set off with a Eurail pass to 5 countries around Europe. I mean, believe me, I felt lucky then. Now it was like I hit the lottery. I can't even imagine how privileged that experience was, right? I had pieces, I got a couple pieces of the Berlin Wall. That tells you exactly when this was, right? I got a couple pieces of the Berlin Wall off the wall that had been chipped away, and there were still bits of it standing there. I visited Berlin, I visited Paris, I visited Valencia and Barcelona and Madrid, and made a loop around Europe. Ended up back in England, right? I went to Rome, and in Rome it was Pesach. Passover. I don't celebrate, I don't care. I don't care. But the holiday, I love. Grew up celebrating it. It's in my blood. It was weird to not celebrate it. Do you know what I mean? Even though I don't care about the religious part of it, the story, I think is kind of horrible, but the practice of it, the Seder, the experience, I missed it. And I was in Rome. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I didn't know anybody. I was alone with a backpack in Europe. So I looked up a synagogue, and it was Shabbos. It was a Saturday morning. I looked up a synagogue, and I found myself at the steps of the oldest surviving synagogue in Rome, right? Which is, it was easily 1,000 years old and probably older. And of course, surviving synagogue because the wars took their toll on synagogues, as you might imagine, and every other building. So there it was. I'm standing at the steps of one of the oldest synagogues in Europe, and I walk in. A security guard checks who I am and looks at my passport, because like is stirring now, and like has stirred in Europe so many times, and stirred in Russia so many times. I mean, hatred is a virus that we have not purged. And there it was, and Jews were afraid then in 1989 or it was 91, just as they are all over the world, all different times. So they check, a guard with a gun checks my passport before I walk in. I walk into the synagogue, and the Shabbos service, the Sabbath service, is going on during Pesach, right, during Passover. And I stand in the back, and a man walks up to me and says, "Who are you?" And I said, "My name is Daniel. I'm from America, and I was just looking for, just sit in this, is it okay if I sit in the service?" And he said, "Do you want to be a part of the service?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Okay." And he opened up a page. He said, do you know about the service? We're coming up on this part. Would you come up and open the ark? You open the doors, and there's a Torah, I said, "Sure." So I sat down for about 5 minutes, and as I sat down, they had started singing a song from the service. Same song, same melody that we grew up singing in a suburb of Chicago. And they're singing it in the oldest synagogue in Rome. I start crying in the back of the synagogue. I can't believe I'm hearing the same song. Then the guy calls me up and they're doing the same rituals. It's weird. I mean, I guess I imagine Catholicism is similar. Maybe it's similar, where it's the same. It's been preserved and passed on. And a lot of this is about passing on this story. And I am rambling so much that I'm never going to get to any of my points. So, but it really was. It was one of the most impactful and special things I ever felt as a Jew. As a Jewish person, as a descendant of Holocaust survivors, I walked into a synagogue in Rome and they were singing and praying exactly the same way as in Skokie, Illinois in 1977. And it's not random and it's not an accident. It's passed on. So here is, if you've never been to a Hanukkah, who has never been a part of Hanukkah candle lighting? A bunch of you. Okay, cool. Here we go. This is how it looks. All right? You light the candle. You turn off all the lights in the house because it's beautiful against the glass. And that's one of my favorite parts, was how pretty it was. Actually, are you able to turn, if you turn off the lights, you won't be able to see anything? Can we turn?
Light the candles.
What's that? Oh, I'm going to ask forgiveness after instead of permission before. Because it's very quick. I don't even need to leave them lit. Even though you're going to want to leave them lit because they're pretty. All right, here we go. So you light the middle one, okay? The middle one is the head honcho, the big cheese, the one that lights the others. Okay? Oh, it's about to go out though. Sorry. So mom or dad lights the candle, and you hold it like this, and you say two blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavoteinu bayamim hahem ba'azman hazeh. Two blessings mean, blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who hath given us the holiday of Hanukkah. The second one is, blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed miracles for our ancestors and for us. The actual words are a little paradoxical and interesting. Bayamim hahem bazman hazeh means, back in those days, in this time. In those days, in this time. So you fill the candles from right to left, and you light them from left to right. And we would always start singing my favorite Hanukkah song while we were doing this. And if we had three boys, so mom would light one, then each boy would take a candle and light, each one, everybody wants to, everybody likes fire. So you light the candles and you sing my favorite song, which goes like this. Ma'osur Yeshuati L'chana Elishabeach Tikon Beit Tefilati V'sham Toda Nizabeach Li'etachim Matbeach Mitzuram Nabeach Azedmor Beshir Mizmor Chanukah Mizbeach Azedmor Beshir Mizmor Chanukah Mizbeach. That's it. And the candle lighting is done for the night. And they burn for 45 or so minutes, and then and they just go out. You put foil on so you don't drip wax on everything. And the next day you do another, and then another, and another. And this is in fact the fourth night tonight, so that's why I brought 4 for you. And so one of the kind of interesting lessons of Hanukkah, it's a weird little story, really, because it's like you're not celebrating the military victory. You're actually celebrating this relatively tiny little thing that the oil kept burning. That's it. That's That's the miracle. And I was thinking about what the subliminal message is of that story, that these militant, activist, very brave people waged a war against a world power, as a small faction trying to reclaim their heritage, their temple, their place, and waged this guerrilla war and won, and then celebrated a bottle of oil burning for 8 days. And actually, I had a funny little takeaway, which is that they did what they had to do and then celebrated a miracle. They didn't sit around and wait for a miracle. If they had sat around and waited, it's kind of fair to assume that they would never have retaken the temple. So they celebrated after they did the job. And, I'm sure you've had, if you've come here for years, actually any religion is going to give a talk at some point about how certainly the power of prayer, and whether you believe that God is listening is going to alter the flow of the universe for your request, but certainly we know how it feels to pray, right? But do you pray for a new job, or do you apply for a new job? Or both. I'm open to both. But if you don't apply for a new job, kind of hard to get a new job. Or if you are praying for a husband or a wife, but don't go out on any dates, then those prayers are going to be less effective. And just one, and again, I don't need to turn this is not a sermon, obviously, this is just an experience. But as I thought about the unconscious lesson of the Hanukkah candles, is they celebrated after they did the hard job of taking their temple. So what's your temple? For me, these days, it's I am fighting a war against procrastination and regret. Because of the number of things that I have put off. I'm 25 years into making music for a living, and I'm proud of those things you listed. That's nice, and it feels good. But I don't hear achievement. I actually hear falling short, honest to God. Because of the number of my goals that I have put off, or not gone for, or not dared to make this or that phone call, or whatever it is. I hear, in my mind, it's the list of things that you aren't saying that I hear, even though it's all real. None of that was nonsense, So for me, I'm writing a musical right now. And I told my little niece, who's not little anymore, my God, she's 20, I think of her. I was there when she was born, so, I told, my niece knows I'm writing a musical, and she's a big fan of Danny. She loves my music, and she's very excited that I'm writing a musical. So she asked me the plot, and I told her the story of the musical, and she was like, oh my God, do you think you can get this produced? And I'm like, Allie, produced is not the goal. A first draft is the goal. For God's sake, I have been thinking about this for 15 years. I am so easily distracted. My goal is to write a first draft. Well, I could pray, and I'm not being sarcastic about praying, or cynical about it. I'm saying I could pray to have a show on Broadway. But the Maccabees conquered the temple first before lighting the candle and celebrating the miracle. So how about I go about this unbelievably difficult work, day by day, a little bit at a time, however I get it done, write a first draft, then correct it, then pitch it, then get singers to sing it. How about I get it onto a stage and then celebrate the miracle? It's a different way of living a life. And I bet none of us would find that any of the important things we've ever achieved came from not going for it. Not making the phone call, not making the deal, not applying for the mortgage, whatever your finest day was. It took some guts. So that's one takeaway. A second takeaway is that, and I bet you found this to be true, and I'm just going to say it very briefly. It doesn't need to be belabored. And that is that sometimes the smallest thing is the sweetest thing. This is, although Hanukkah has taken on kind of a bigger profile in America, that is thought to have been culturally a response to Christmas in that, and I grew up in a sort of specific way, a minority. The specific way is that I was on the outside looking in of the major holidays that America celebrates. Okay? I have never, it's not entirely from being Jewish, but I have never had a hamburger at McDonald's. Ever. I grew up in a kosher home. McDonald's was really not allowed. It's not kosher food. I didn't stick with that very well. But I still, to this day, my wife can't believe it, I still have never had a Big Mac. No idea what it tastes like. Right? And so that's a trivial example. But a more real example is, if you have celebrated Christmas your whole life, like Melina has, my wife, imagine what it's like, if you can, to not celebrate Christmas. You've never talked to Santa. You never set up a tree. There are no presents. There are no parties. When you're working at an office and they celebrate Christmas, it's for fun. It's free cake. But it's not a holiday. You don't go to church. You don't study the birth of Jesus, the death. You don't do any of it. It's just happening out there, right, on the outside looking in. That is how Christmas always felt. Well, for Jews in America, I imagine that Hanukkah got more and more interesting as Christmas probably has gotten much more interesting. And little gifts are common and traditional in Hanukkah, but a torrent of them? Absolutely not. Chocolate coins sometimes, little pieces of chocolate, or sometimes, but it's become a much bigger thing. But really, all Hanukkah actually is what you just did with me. Like I said, welcome to the Nahmod family for the morning. That was it. That was it. 2 blessings and an extra candle each day for 8 nights. And a minute to learn the story. That's it. That's how a tradition carries on for 2,200 years. That was it. Small things are the sweetest things very often. If you think, I certainly think in my own life, absolutely true. My boy, I'm going to go over time, so I got to stop. But like I had one of these little moments. Jude came up out of his bedroom like 4 or 5 nights ago. Daddy, I can't sleep. I can't sleep no matter what I do. My mind won't stop. I said, okay, here's a suggestion. Have a little bit of milk and go read a book that you've read before. A book that's familiar and comfortable. Not a crazy one, not a hilarious one, just read a book that's kind of nice. But first have a little bit of milk, and go lay in bed, make sure there's no lights in your eyes, and I bet you fall asleep. And he said, okay. And he went and got his little milk, and he came in, and before he went back downstairs to his room, he came over and gave me a hug. And he hugs us. He's an affectionate boy. But that hug I noticed. I don't always notice, but that hug I noticed. Because what he was saying was, thanks for not being mad at me for being up at 10. Thanks for having a constructive suggestion as my father, when I can't fall asleep, because he doesn't have the answer to how he's going to fall asleep. And I gave him a way. There's other ways, but I gave him a way, and he hugged me to thank me for being, even just being in the house when he needed a father, because his mom was asleep an hour at that point. Dad was awake. Dad was home. I mean, if you think about the things Dad could have otherwise been. Dad could have been, seriously, drunk, or could have been out. Dad could have been watching football. Dad could have not wanted to be bothered. Dad could have been, a lot of things. And I'm not saying, I'm never drunk, but I could have been distracted. I could have been distracted or busy or at a gig. There's other things I could have been. I could have been out of town, but I wasn't. I was there on the couch just reading, actually, when he came up, and I had constructive thought for him, helpful, patient. I was good. For 5 minutes, I was the dad I want to be. And he gave me a hug to thank me. That was the sweetest 5 seconds of my entire day. If you think about the sweetest thing in your day, it's a candle, a song, a hug, a smile, a bite of food. The sweetest things are usually, often anyway, the simplest things. And Hanukkah is a reminder of that to me too. I'm gonna stop there, and just thank you for going on a little Hanukkah ride with me. I hope you found it interesting. And the last thing I'll share with you as I end is, if you've ever seen a dreidel and you're wondering what that is, it is two things. It is a toy and a game. I have wax on my fingers. It is a toy and a game. It's a top. It does this. Okay. And so it's a game. You play, little kids like it. It's fun, you know, it's cute. And I bought this one because my wife loves purple. But it also has 4 letters on it. Nes Gadol Hayasham, Nun Gimel Shin He. 4 letters from the Hebrew alphabet, one on each side. So in some, you could gamble a penny or a nickel, you know, like what side is going to land on. And it's kind of a little fun game, you know, if you want to teach your kids gambling at an early age. But it also, the last thing I'll say about it, in terms of, I opened with, you know, talking about the fact that Jews had been evicted and persecuted and so on from back then, and of course many times since. And it is not always historically safe to practice Judaism. This is not a lecture, and this is not a self-pity story. This is just a fact. It hasn't always been, isn't always, and in all places, safe to practice. Other religions have this story too. In Judaism, there have been many episodes, many regimes in many countries where it becomes illegal, dangerous to practice Judaism for multiple, different reasons and different contexts. This was actually created as a stealth educational tool. It has these 4 letters on it, Nes Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened then. And in places where Judaism was outlawed, in places where your life was in danger for publicly practicing religion, you were then ordered not to put this in the window. And instead, you played this game. And while you are playing this game, in a whisper, you can impart the story and pass it along, one generation to the next. 2,200 years later, the strategy has worked. The game tells the story. And it is the telling of the story that is the meaning and the purpose of Hanukkah. A story of resilience and self-reliance, a story of triumph over adversity, a story of small over big, a story of freedom over oppression. This is the nature of the story. And I'm not sure that story doesn't continue to resonate exactly as it is today. Not a political conversation or commentary at all. But if you look at if you scan the history of Jews in 2,200 years and many other groups and minorities and so on, you find resilience, self-reliance, a yearning for freedom, a triumph over the majority, a hostile majority. You find these stories to be incredibly resonant. So this story becomes the story of the Jewish people and many other people as well. So we continue to celebrate it every year in the sweetest, simplest little way possible. We light a candle and sing a song and play a game with our kids. Thank you.